Hey everyone, my name's Madison. Thanks for checking out my channel. Today I'm going to talk about my favorite books of 2021. Okay, so I'm going to start by just going over some general stats for the year, and then I'll get into my favorite fiction books and my favorite nonfiction books because I am pretty proud of myself. I met my nonfiction book goal for the year, so we'll get into that. Okay, so this year was significantly better than last year for me. Last year I only read 37 books, and not to say only, I mean just that was a disappointing year for me because I read some really terrible books and it was just a bad year in general, as we all know, but this year was better. I read 49 books, so I didn't quite reach my goal of 50, and I don't think I will by the end of I don't even have my watch on. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't think I will within the next 2 or 3 days. My husband and I are listening to the 5th Harry Potter book on audio as we do our traveling for the Christmas season, but I don't think we'll finish it. So 49 books for the year is still pretty good, and I'm very happy about that. And so I read 35 fiction books and 14 nonfiction books, which I think my goal for last year was 12, one a month, so I exceeded that goal. I didn't read every book on my nonfiction TBR, but I read many of them, and I just added in some other ones along the way. Also, of the 49 books that I read, 15 of them, I think, yes, 15 of them were 5-star, or I gave 5-star to, which is pretty good. That's what, 30% or about 30% of the books that I read I liked enough to give 5-star to, so that's very exciting. And I had 0 1-star reviews, so that's a significantly better reading year than last year. I reread 4 books, like a couple of Harry Potters, a couple of the Narnia books, and the Fellowship of the Ring, and those were all on audio. And then in general, I listened to, of the 49 books that I read, 11 of those I actually listened to on audiobook. I did a lot of audiobooks in the summertime. That's just how it worked out, so that's pretty good. Or I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm happy with that statistic. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and actually share those 5-star books with you. I have 6 fiction books that I will share and 5 nonfiction books that I will share. Now, I know that that does not equal 15, but several of the books that I gave 5 stars to were actually rereads, so I am not going to tell you again how much I love Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. I don't think that's necessary, right? So we will just jump in to the new 5-star reads that I have for this year. Okay, the first one is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is a fantasy/piratey book, and it takes place in Robin Hobb's realm of the Elderlings world. I especially loved the magic system in this book. I love the magical creatures and the magical ships and the idea of this magical river. I love it. I definitely plan on continuing this series, and I do have a couple of videos about this book. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can check those out. The next book that I gave 5 stars to in 2021 is Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. This book is historical fiction with a little bit of mystery and a little bit of magical realism that just makes it pretty perfect. I adored it, and I really am glad that I read my first Diane Setterfield book because I also am interested in reading The 13th Tale this year, which I heard is a little bit gothic-y, so I'm very excited about that. And that's just, that's another new author that I got to experience this year, which makes me so happy. The next 5-star book that I have for you is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I have enjoyed other Agatha Christie books, but this is the best one I have read so far. It is not your typical detective novel. It's more of a whodunit on an island, and people just start dying, as the title kind of implies, and then there were none. And you get to figure out, or you can try to figure out what happens, and I thought it was brilliant. Plot, pacing, everything was perfect. By far the best Agatha Christie book that I have read. Although, I mean, like, that's of what, like 4 or 5 that I've read, so obviously I'm not the expert. This is just my personal opinion. This is wonderful, and you should read it. And again, I think I have a larger or longer review of this, and I'll put it up yonder somewhere for you to go and check out if you're interested. The next book I have for you guys is That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. This is one of my husband's favorite books, and he has tried to read it to me several times, and I finally read it for myself this year. It was on my TBR because I'm trying to read the books that he loves, you know, because I love him, so that always works out nicely. But when he tried to describe this book to me, he said, you know, there's Merlin and a bear and a talking head. And that's really all that he could tell me. And so I really, you know, I struggled to try to get into it, even though it was the 3rd book in a series that I really enjoyed called the Space Trilogy. What I will tell you about this book is that it's kind of a mythological, magical allegory of the classic epic battle between good versus evil, and C.S. Lewis sets it on Earth, but in his mind, he's telling you the story of that battle of good versus evil from a larger, galaxy-wide perspective. So that sounds a little silly, but C.S. Lewis has this wonderful grasp of humanity that just makes me feel on every single page like, oh, I know those people, those characters so well. I am those characters, you know what I mean? And so despite the fact that there is Merlin and a bear and a talking head, it's still a fabulous book. I think that this probably could be read as a standalone, but the other 2 books in the series, Paralandra and Out of the Silent Planet, are both fantastic as well, in their own C.S. Lewis-y kind of way. So if you're here for that, then definitely check them out. The next book on my list is a Stephen King book, and I read several Stephen King books this year and was a little disappointed, but finally we got a 5-star read, and that is Misery. This is not your typical Stephen King because it's not horror in the sense that there are no monsters or anything like that. Oh, but it's terrifying. It's kind of a psychological thriller, I guess you could call it. But even though it's not that typical Stephen King, he gives you these absolutely insane characters and then just some generally flawed characters, and he throws them together, and it's a terrifying book. Most of you probably know what this is about because obviously it's been around for a long time, but it's about a writer who is kidnapped, I suppose, or writer-napped by his biggest fan, who is not at all satisfied with the book that he just wrote. And so that doesn't go very well for the author. It's absolutely terrifying. It had me gripped the entire time, and Stephen King is kind of, you know, playing with the idea of him as a writer. One of the things I really don't like when Stephen King does is when he makes the main character a writer. I tend to really hate that character, but that wasn't the case in this book. This time, he plays with the idea of the fact that his character is a writer and almost kind of makes fun of himself along the way, you know, talking about those melodramatic moments in stories, talking about what it means to write a bestseller, even if, you know, all of the things that could possibly mean. And so it's great on all kinds of levels. Absolutely fantastic Stephen King writing, especially the way he gives you the narrative and the characters' thoughts all at the same time. Really, really enjoyed it. And then I saved this one for last, even though I didn't read it last, because I would say that this is my favorite fiction book that I read this year. Probably is not going to come as a big surprise, but The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, best book I read this year, best fiction book I read this year. This is the 3rd book in her Cromwell series. So it's Henry VIII time period, but she tells you the story from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell, who's generally portrayed as a bad guy. And I mean, okay, he was a little bit of a bad guy, but she makes the character, she shows you the complexity of this person, not a character, a person, and she does it perfectly. I loved the writing, I loved the pacing, I loved the symbolism throughout, and I loved the ending. I just read it and reread it the last page or so. It was absolutely beautiful. So glad that I finally read these books, and I found them on YouTube. So I just thank you, YouTube, for BookTube specifically, for introducing me to this wonderful author. I was so pleased to have read it, and I kind of want to read more Hilary Mantel, but I'm not really sure where to go next. So if you have read The Mirror and the Light or any of these books, and you have read other Hilary Mantel books, let me know down in the comments which ones you would recommend that I read next. Okay, so now for my favorite nonfiction books that I read this year. I have done other videos of a few of these, so I'll link them up top, but other than that, I'll just go ahead and get started. So the first nonfiction book that I read this year that I absolutely loved was Paul by N.T. Wright. This is a biography of the Apostle Paul, and I really appreciated this because it's very down to earth, even though N.T. Wright is a scholar, and it really broadened my perspective on the historical context of Paul's life and writings, which is super important anytime that you're reading the Bible, or I suppose any historical document, to understand the historical context, what Paul was saying to the people he was writing, and then you can do that application part of it. So N.T. Wright really helped me put things together, and I just really loved it. My next nonfiction book that I gave 5 stars to is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. This is the kind of memoir of a man who survived the Holocaust, and he is writing about pain and suffering and about why that is valuable to humanity. And it was wonderful, and a lot of it was difficult because he gets into the psychology of suffering because he was a psychologist, and so that part was a little dense, but in general it's absolutely wonderful, and I think it's probably an essential read for everybody, so go pick it up. It's short. And let me know if you've read this, let me know what you think down in the comments. The next 5-star book that I have for you is The Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel. Václav Havel was a Czechoslovakian dissident writing about how to overcome totalitarianism, and you know, we should really take his word for it because he ended up becoming the president of Czechoslovakia and then becoming the first president of a free and independent Czech Republic. So we should listen to some of what he has to say, friends. It's also a short book, but it's not necessarily an easy read, although the translation was very good. It was easy to read in that sense, but it's dense. So definitely recommend it, and let me know what you think if you have read this. Next up on my list is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. She escaped North Korea with her mother when she was young, like 12 or 13. Obviously it says it in here, but I read it 6 months ago, so sorry. And it is her story of what life was like in North Korea, why they ended up, the circumstances under which she ended up escaping, her life in South Korea, and then on from there. It was an intense read, a difficult read, but I really did enjoy it, if you can, you know, that's a funny word to use in this sense, but it was very good, and I really appreciated hearing her story. And finally, my favorite nonfiction book of the year, even though it took me the longest to read, is Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals. This is a biography of Abraham Lincoln, along with the biographies of the men who served in his cabinet. She chose to write the biography of all of those men along with Lincoln because it highlights Lincoln's political genius and the way in which he could unify people in order to achieve his goals. It's brilliant. It's a massive book, and even though it took me a long time to read, I loved every page of it. Some people think that she put too many minute details in here. I disagree, because I feel that she did a very good job of explaining the importance of even those small details that she added. She didn't just throw them in, you know, in like some boring list format. It was a well-written story, or it felt like a well-written story to me. I found this book especially valuable because I feel like it changed my perspective in a way about who Lincoln was, what exactly he accomplished, and what we lost when he was assassinated. Reading this book, I just get this sense of how different our country could have been if he had been able to lead during the Reconstruction era. And so that's just, it's invaluable for me as an American and as a teacher. So I just really, really appreciate what the author accomplished with this book. So that's Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln. You should probably read it. You should probably read it. If you read nonfiction, pick up this book. Okay friends, those are my 5-star reads for the year. I would love to hear what you think about these books and the best books that you read. Please let me know down in the comments, and I will see you soon. Bye!